Title: The House on Hollow Hill. Chapter 1. The invitation. Marissa had always wanted to move away from the city. The noise, the crowded streets, the endless rush, it wore on her. So when she received an old-fashioned letter in the mail, inviting her to a house she had never heard of, she felt a mix of excitement and curiosity. The letter was simple, no return address, just a name, Catherine Holloway, the name of the woman who supposedly left her a house in her will. Marissa was puzzled, but the offer was too enticing to ignore. She packed her bags, said goodbye to her old life, and took the long drive to Hollow Hill. The house was isolated, perched on a hill with thick woods surrounding it. When she arrived, the eerie silence and the overgrown lawn made her question whether she had made the right decision. But something in her gut told her that this was her fate. The door creaked open as she entered, the smell of dust and mildew overwhelming her senses. The grand staircase twisted upward, and the faded wallpaper seemed to whisper secrets. Little did Marissa know, her inheritance came with a price. Chapter 2. The first night. Marissa spent the first night in the house trying to settle in, but the place felt wrong. Every step she took seemed to echo through the empty halls. She heard things, faint whispers just out of reach, and the occasional creak of floorboards from upstairs. But the strangest part was the mirror in the foyer. It was an antique, framed in silver, and it seemed to reflect more than just her image. The longer she stared at it, the more she felt like it was watching her. By the time night fell, she was exhausted. She locked every door, drew the curtains, and tucked herself under the thick quilt. But as she tried to fall asleep, the whispers started again, closer this time. And with them came a cold draft, despite all the windows being shut. Marissa pulled the covers tighter around her, trying to ignore the chill that crept across her skin. Then, the sound of slow footsteps started in the hallway just outside her door. Chapter 3. The haunting begins. The next morning, Marissa tried to shake off the unsettling feeling. She explored the house, hoping to find something familiar, something to make her feel at ease. But every room felt like it was stuck in time, frozen in the past. In the attic, she found dusty old trunks filled with forgotten belongings, including a journal. It was Catherine Holloway's. Marissa sat on the attic floor and began reading, eager for some answers. The journal described Catherine's life in the house, but as the entries progressed, the tone darkened. Catherine spoke of strange noises at night, of seeing shadows move across the walls. But what stood out the most was the mention of a dark presence that had followed her family for generations. Catherine had tried to leave, but every time, she was drawn back. Suddenly, Marissa felt a chill in the air. She turned around, and in the corner of the attic stood a shadow, a figure with hollow, dark eyes, staring at her. Before she could react, it vanished. Chapter 4. The First Visitor. Marissa didn't know what to think. Was she losing her mind? Had the isolation finally gotten to her? The strange events continued, each more terrifying than the last. One evening, as she was reading Catherine's journal, a knock sounded at the door. When she opened it, a woman stood on the doorstep, her clothes old-fashioned and worn. "My name is Evelyn," the woman said softly. "I've lived on the hill for years. I'm here to warn you." Evelyn's voice trembled as she explained that she had once been close to Catherine Holloway. The house, she said, was cursed. Catherine had made a deal, one that tied her spirit to the house, and now, it was seeking a new host. Marissa laughed it off, but Evelyn's eyes were full of fear. She told Marissa to leave the house immediately, or she would suffer the same fate as Catherine. Before Marissa could respond, Evelyn turned and disappeared into the night. Chapter 5. The Dark Presence. The next few days were a blur of unease. Marissa began to experience strange dreams, dreams of being trapped in the house, of running through endless hallways, of the dark figure chasing her. Each time she awoke, it was as though she hadn't slept at all. One night, unable to sleep, Marissa wandered the house. She reached the basement door, which she had avoided until now. Something drew her to it, a whisper she couldn't resist. The air was thick with a malevolent force as she descended into the darkness. The basement was cold, its stone walls damp and covered in mold. There was a strange symbol etched into the floor, a circle surrounded by markings that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. In the center was a large, rusted chain, attached to something beneath the floorboards. Before she could investigate further, a voice echoed through the basement, cold and hollow. "You shouldn't have come." Marissa bolted upstairs, slamming the basement door behind her, but the voice followed, growing louder with each passing moment. Chapter 6: The Mirror's Secret. Marissa could no longer ignore the mirror in the foyer. It was drawing her in, its surface almost hypnotic. One evening, she couldn't resist its pull any longer. She stood before it, staring into her reflection, but her image began to warp. The woman in the mirror smiled, an unnerving, unnatural smile. Suddenly, she felt a cold hand touch her shoulder. Marissa spun around, but no one was there. The reflection in the mirror shifted again, and this time, it wasn't her own face staring back. It was a man, a pale, gaunt figure, with hollow eyes. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Marissa's heart pounded as the figure stepped out of the mirror, crossing the boundary between the real world and whatever lay within the glass. Chapter 7: The Family Curse. Marissa began to research the Holloway family, desperate for answers. She uncovered old newspaper clippings about tragic deaths, strange disappearances, and rumors of dark rituals performed in the house. The more she learned, the more she realized that Catherine Holloway had not been the only one to suffer. The Holloway family had been cursed for generations, bound by a pact made long ago with an entity that thrived on fear and despair. The house was a prison for the souls of those who had lived there, and now, Marissa was the next in line to take Catherine's place. As the days passed, Marissa could feel the darkness closing in. The house seemed alive, its walls breathing with an unnatural rhythm. Shadows moved across the rooms, and whispers filled her ears even when she was alone. Chapter 8: The Choice. One night, as the darkness settled over the house, Marissa stood in front of the mirror again. The gaunt figure appeared once more, but this time, he spoke. "You have a choice," he whispered. "You can leave, and the curse will be passed to someone else. Or you can stay, and become part of the family's legacy. The house will claim you." Torn between the two options, Marissa realized she could not escape. No matter where she went, the house would follow. It had already claimed her. Chapter 9: The Final Night. On the final night, Marissa made her decision. She would confront the entity that had controlled the Holloway family for so long. Armed with nothing but Catherine's journal and the courage she had left, she descended into the basement one last time. The markings on the floor had shifted, and the chain was no longer rusted. It gleamed with a dark, metallic shine. As she stood in the center of the symbol, the house began to shake, and the shadows gathered around her, closing in. The voice echoed once more, stronger now. "You cannot escape." But Marissa was ready. She recited the incantation from Catherine's journal, hoping it would be enough. The house screamed in agony as the dark presence was ripped from the walls and floors, but Marissa could feel her own soul beginning to unravel. Chapter 10: The Last Echo. The morning after, the house was silent. Marissa's body was found by the local authorities, but when they entered, they found no trace of the dark presence. It had vanished. But those who dared step inside the house could feel it, a presence lingering, watching. The house on Hollow Hill was empty, but it would never be truly free. And somewhere, in the depths of the house, a faint whisper echoed, "You are not alone." The end. Would you dare to live in a house with such a dark past?